Imagine walking into a congressional hearing thinking it's just another day, only to watch a seasoned political operative unravel on live television, word by word, document by document, until silence becomes the loudest admission of guilt. But before we dive into this story, I want to hear from you. Comment down below. Where in the world are you watching from? Let's light up this comment section. And hey, if you love stories with high drama, power shifts, and the kind of moments that leave people speechless, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter in these powerful untold stories. In this gripping political showdown, Representative Jasmine Crockett confronts Kash Patel with a trove of unexpected evidence, emails, memos, even an encrypted audio clip that challenges his sworn testimony. What starts as a routine oversight session spirals into a high-stakes unraveling of covert communication tactics, buried truths, and a quiet whistleblower who set it all in motion. We're diving into how this moment exposed more than just one man. It shook the walls of a hidden system that counted on no one ever looking too closely. Kash Patel, a former government official, walked into the room like it was just another formality, confident and composed. He took his seat at the witness table inside room 2141 of the Rayburn House office building in Washington, D.C., expecting a routine oversight hearing. It was a typical Wednesday morning. The skies outside were overcast with a light drizzle, the kind of weather that cast a dull weight over everything, making the mundane feel just a little heavier. Staffers bustled through the halls carrying legal pads, coffee cups, and nervous anticipation. Reporters stood in clusters behind velvet ropes, adjusting their earpieces and murmuring predictions about what would likely be an unremarkable proceeding. Cameras from C-SPAN and national networks flickered on, their red lights blinking patiently. Inside, the committee members arrived one by one, faces worn from long weeks of political sparring. Most of them wore expressions that blended fatigue with feigned interest, bracing themselves for what they assumed would be another day of scripted questions and vague answers. But Representative Jasmine Crockett was different. She entered quietly, nearly unnoticed, holding a thin, well-organized legal pad. No grand entrance, no loud greetings. Her demeanor was focused, almost surgical. Her eyes scanned the room with quiet intensity. She'd spent days preparing, cross-referencing footnotes, double-checking citations, and rehearsing the order of documents she might not even need to use. But she brought them anyway, just in case. Her aide, Brenda Marino, a sharp-eyed woman in a forest green blazer, whispered final updates before taking her place just behind her. The whole team had the air of people who knew they weren't just attending a hearing, they were setting a trap. Just a few feet away, Kash Patel leaned back comfortably in his chair. He wore a sharp navy suit, a tie that was just bold enough to make a statement, and a smug smile that made him look untouchable. He joked with his attorney in hushed tones, laughing at something said off mic. He appeared to have no idea what was coming. His nameplate sat perfectly centered under the lights. The setting was formal, yet strangely intimate. Every chair creak, every cough, every shuffling paper was amplified in the tense quiet. The air felt charged, as if the walls themselves knew what was about to unfold. Chairman DuPont finally opened the floor, breezing through procedural remarks and the agenda for the day. Patel was scheduled to answer for alleged inconsistencies in his previous testimony tied to an intelligence review from the year before. On the surface, nothing seemed explosive. The questions were supposed to be dry, technical, clarifications on timelines, just dots to connect. Then Jasmine Crockett took the mic. What she said next would not only derail the hearing, it would ignite a chain reaction that no one in the room, perhaps not even Jasmine herself, could have fully anticipated. The hearing had moved along quietly for the first half hour, procedural back and forth, a game of verbal chess where every move was predictable. Patel answered confidently, speaking in crisp, pre-cleared language that had all the flavor of a briefing memo. He was smooth, if a bit mechanical. His responses were tight, emotionless, and clearly rehearsed. Then, the chairman nodded in Representative Jasmine Crockett's direction. Her mic lit red. She leaned forward slightly and spoke with calm precision. Mr. Patel, in your last appearance before this committee, you testified that you had no written communication with Mr. Devlin regarding the March 14th briefing. Correct? Patel barely reacted. That's correct, he said, with a rehearsed nod. I believe that's what I stated. There was a pause. Jasmine didn't look up. She calmly flipped open her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't marked with highlights or dramatic stamps, just black ink on white paper. Quiet, cold, deliberate. I am entering into the record a memo dated March 13th, she said, addressed from your personal email to Mr. Devlin's private account. It references verbatim details of that same March 14th briefing. The room stilled. Even the shuffling behind the press table halted. A chair creaked in the background and someone audibly shifted in their seat. Patel's posture stiffened, but only slightly. His smile faded just enough to notice. That's not possible, he said flatly. That email must be misattributed. But Jasmine wasn't done. She began reading from the memo, line by line. Every sentence landed like a hammer disguised as a feather. The contents were specific, timestamps, bullet points, and casual language that made clear this wasn't a stray draft. The email was signed. Patel's signature was visible at the bottom, along with CCs to 2 staffers. Brenda Marino, seated behind Jasmine, never took her eyes off Patel's lawyer. He was no longer relaxed. He leaned forward, jaws set, clearly aware this was no longer standard testimony. Chairman DuPont interrupted to ask for clarification. Patel leaned into the mic, trying to steer the moment, trying to regain narrative control, but the rhythm had been broken. He stumbled slightly in his response, parsing legal distinctions, trying to thread the needle between denial and delay. And still, Jasmine never raised her voice. Her tone remained calm, controlled, surgical. Back in the hallway, a young intern watching the hearing from a monitor muttered under his breath, "Yo, is she about to cook this man?" Inside the chamber, Patel scratched his neck. His tie suddenly looked too tight. Jasmine continued, slowly placing the printed email in front of her. Then she looked up, for the first time. "I'll move to my next question," she said, "but this is just one of several discrepancies we've identified." Before she could continue, Patel raised his hand, his voice noticeably firmer. "With all due respect, Representative," he said, the phrase respect laced with irritation, "that email doesn't reflect what actually happened. There's context you're missing." Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "Then perhaps you can provide that context now," she replied, casually flipping to the next page. Patel leaned in. "If someone on my team sent that draft and it was misattributed to me—" "You signed it," Jasmine cut in, tone still neutral. "The signature line matches 3 others we've archived from the same address, same font, same metadata. Would you like me to read those into the record as well?" A ripple moved through the room. For the first time, Patel looked unsettled. His jaw flexed. He glanced at his attorney, who gave no signal, just a silent hand on Patel's arm, a nonverbal command, "Stop talking." Jasmine didn't wait. She accepted another document from Brenda, this one printed in color. "This is a screenshot of your encrypted text exchange with Mr. Devlin," she said. "The day after the memo, you referred to it directly. That memo's locked, clean, and off the radar, just like we said." The room froze. Patel gave a dry laugh, short, brittle. "You're seriously bringing screenshots now?" "Do you dispute the content?" Jasmine asked, deadpan. "No, I'm saying you're trying to make a political spectacle out of informal back-and-forths." "They were about a federal intelligence briefing," she replied plainly. "Not a lunch order." And just like that, the tone of the hearing shifted again. Members who had been half-scrolling on their phones looked up. Reporters whispered furiously. Chairman DuPont adjusted his glasses, his gaze falling on Patel's lawyer, who remained motionless. Then came the most chilling moment yet. "Mr. Patel," the chairman said slowly, "you may answer the question or invoke your Fifth Amendment rights, but I'll remind you, this committee takes perjury seriously." The word perjury hung in the air like a slow-burning fuse. Patel clenched his jaw. "There's no perjury," he said through gritted teeth. "This is a smear job, and frankly, I'm not going to sit here." "You're not sitting here because we want to play games," Jasmine interrupted, voice still flat. "You're here because something doesn't add up, and Americans deserve clarity." The stage was set, the air was electric, Patel had cracked, and Jasmine, still calm, still methodical, had only just begun. Kash Patel was no longer calm. No longer the composed strategist who had entered room 241 with confidence stitched into every word. His responses were short, sharp, and increasingly defensive. His rhythm, once deliberate and lawyerly, had given way to raw irritation, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't letting up. Her tone remained steady. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The weight of the evidence did the talking for her. Documents, emails, encrypted texts, each one chipped away at Patel's version of events. He tried to reframe. She countered with facts. He deflected. She quoted him, his own words, verbatim. Then came the moment. Patel leaned forward into his mic, voice tight. "This is political theater. You're not asking questions, you're performing for your base." Jasmine paused, lifted an eyebrow. "Is that your final answer?" His eyes narrowed. And then, without waiting for another word, he pushed his chair back and stood. No announcement, no request to be excused, just an abrupt decision. He yanked off his mic, muttered something under his breath, and walked out. The room froze. Even Chairman DuPont seemed caught off guard. "Mr. Patel, you are not dismissed. This committee has not adjourned," he called out, but Patel didn't turn back. He walked straight toward the side exit, his lawyer trailing after him with a look that bordered on panic. Cameras tracked him as he passed behind the dais, face flushed, posture stiff. The image would go viral within minutes. At first, no one knew what to do. The chamber sat in stunned silence, like a collective breath had been stolen. Then the noise started. Reporters stood, staffers whispered, phones lit up like flashbulbs. A local news anchor in the back row began broadcasting live from her seat. Upstairs in the media room, interns were already slicing the clip into shareable segments. On Twitter, hashtags were spinning up in real time. Patel storms out, Crockett receipts, memo gate. But Jasmine remained seated. She didn't react, didn't smirk, didn't speak. She simply opened the folder Brenda had slid to her seconds before Patel's exit. Her eyes moved down the first page, once, twice. Her expression didn't change, but there was something different now. More steel behind the calm, Chairman DuPont cleared his throat. "Given Mr. Patel's departure, we'll take a brief recess to determine how to proceed." But Jasmine already knew what came next, because Patel's walkout didn't mark the end of this hearing. It marked the beginning of something far more serious. The room was still settling after Patel's unexpected departure when Jasmine Crockett made her next move. She didn't wait for things to calm completely. She didn't need the perfect moment. With Patel gone, she simply asked to re-enter the hearing into official session. Chairman DuPont gave the nod. Patel's seat remained empty. Jasmine announced that the committee had verified the authenticity of a new document. It came from Patel's personal email server, dated March 16th, just 2 days after he'd testified under oath that no strategies had been used to obscure communication. The subject line read, "Deconfliction Plan, Avoid Traceable Channels." Behind her, Brenda displayed the memo on a screen. It detailed deliberate tactics for avoiding Freedom of Information Act exposure, burner phones, encrypted messaging apps, and alternate calendar systems to avoid digital tracking. The room took it in quietly, but the weight was obvious. Patel had denied everything, and now his own writing was contradicting him. Outside the building, word was spreading fast. Protesters were beginning to arrive, not in an organized wave, but spontaneously. People were reacting in real time to what they were seeing on their phones. Clips of Patel walking out, screenshots of the memo Jasmine had just entered into the record, reporters summarizing the evidence on live streams. But they still didn't know that Jasmine hadn't yet revealed the most damaging piece of evidence she had. 15 minutes after the memo was displayed, Patel returned. There was no anger in his body language this time, no posturing. He entered through a side door, not the main one. His coat was folded over one arm, and he looked like someone who had just been told the walls were closing in. There were no jokes, no side comments to his lawyer, just silence. He took his seat. Chairman DuPont didn't acknowledge his return formally. He simply resumed the session and invited Patel to respond. Patel leaned forward slightly and began to speak. His tone had changed. Gone was the sharp, defensive edge. In its place was a kind of careful exhaustion. He said that some of the language in the memo wasn't meant to be taken literally, that in policy discussions, language was sometimes used informally to describe risks and scenarios. Jasmine asked plainly whether terms like burner phones and encrypted systems were part of that informal language. Patel hesitated, then deflected. He asked whether he had to keep answering questions framed like that. Before his lawyer could speak, Chairman DuPont reminded him that he was still under oath. That was the moment something shifted. Patel's posture softened, as if some internal calculation had failed, and there was no winning strategy left to follow. His voice dropped lower, and he said it outright. I was following a playbook. One we all understood. One that worked. The room went quiet. Jasmine stopped writing. She looked up and asked, "And who is we?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "The policy team, at least 5 of us." She followed with the next question. "Were you instructed to keep communications off the record?" Patel didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." When asked who gave that instruction, he said only, "I'd rather not say here." There was no need to press him further right then. The hearing was already changing tone, from one focused on uncovering inconsistencies to one exposing the framework of a coordinated effort. Outside the room, headlines updated within minutes. Patel admits to using off-record channels. At least 5 involved. Names withheld. In Spokane, Washington, a middle school civics teacher paused her lesson and streamed the hearing live for her students. She pointed to the screen and explained what they were seeing, an actual oversight process working as it should, with real consequences attached. Back in the chamber, Jasmine kept moving. She told Patel they would pause, not because his testimony had reached a conclusion, but because there was one more document she needed to introduce, and she wanted him to hear it in full. Brenda displayed a screenshot on the monitor. It showed a message from Patel's phone. The text read, "Make sure we don't mention it in email. If she asks, deny it. She won't follow up." Patel stared at it for a long time before he spoke. He said, "I didn't write that." Jasmine responded, "It came from your phone." He shifted in his seat, saying maybe it was spoofed, maybe he didn't remember. Brenda then provided metadata tying the message to Patel's device and confirming that it had been sent at the same time his secure committee login was active. Patel rubbed his face. He looked visibly overwhelmed. "This is insane," he muttered. "I swear I didn't." Jasmine cut him off. "Then help us understand who did." He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the chairman and said, "I want a lawyer." Chairman DuPont reminded him, "You already have one." Patel didn't flinch. "I want another one." At that, the chairman suspended the hearing for legal consultation. Conversations erupted across the room. Reporters were already texting producers. Members of the committee leaned into one another with hurried questions. Jasmine leaned toward Brenda and said quietly, "That wasn't the most explosive thing." Brenda raised her eyebrows. Jasmine added, "That's next." The hearing wasn't over, not by a long shot. The room emptied again after Chairman DuPont announced the suspension. It wasn't a typical recess. This wasn't a break for lunch or a pause to check emails. This was the moment where everyone knew something had cracked, and they didn't know what would happen next. Reporters rushed toward their cameras. Producers on the phone barked into headsets. The Patel hearing had already taken over the headlines, but now it had become something larger. The exit, the memo, the implication of a larger team, and the sudden, quiet request for a new lawyer. Every element hinted at a much deeper problem, something that went far beyond Patel himself. What very few people in the room knew, however, was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't done. While Patel and his legal team were meeting behind closed doors, trying to contain what had already spilled out, Jasmine was seated at her desk with a transcript printout in front of her. She read it slowly, carefully, line by line. It was tied to a piece of evidence she hadn't introduced yet. Not because it lacked relevance. If anything, it was the most damning item she had. But because timing mattered. She wasn't trying to shock the room. She was trying to land something that would stick. Across the room, Brenda leaned in and asked if she planned to play it now. Jasmine shook her head. "No," she said. "We hold it until we're back on the record. The chairman will want it documented." While they waited, the outside world was moving quickly. Newsrooms had switched to wall-to-wall coverage. Live panels were forming on every major cable network. On CNN, a constitutional law professor explained that if the memo Jasmine had revealed earlier could be tied to active concealment of government records, it wasn't just political. it was criminal. On Fox, the framing was more cautious, but even they couldn't ignore the plainness of the evidence. The clip of Patel walking out had already been replayed hundreds of times, and then someone in the press pool learned about the audio. It hadn't been played yet, but it had been mentioned, quietly, behind a few closed doors. An unnamed staffer leaked its existence to a journalist who tweeted that the committee might be sitting on a recording. That was all it took. The internet lit up. Some speculated it was a voicemail. Others thought it might be fake. A few political influencers floated the theory that Crockett had baited Patel into walking out so she could reveal the evidence without interruption. But inside the room, the truth was much simpler. The audio came in anonymously. No context, no source. Just a file, delivered with a timestamp and a cryptic note. And it was Patel's voice. By the time the hearing resumed, nearly an hour after the suspension, the room had filled again. Not just with the committee and the press, but with staffers from nearby offices. They had slipped into seats, hovered in doorways, stood along the back wall pretending to be on business. No one wanted to miss what was coming. Chairman DuPont called the session back to order. "Representative Crockett," he said, "you may proceed with your next submission." Jasmine adjusted her microphone, glanced at the committee, and spoke in the same steady tone she'd maintained since the beginning. "What you're about to hear," she said, "is a recording from an internal virtual meeting hosted by Mr. Patel during his time as a senior advisor. In that meeting, he provided instruction to his staff about communication protocols and risk management strategies. The full session ran over an hour. We've clipped a relevant 45-second segment. There was no protest from Patel this time. He sat silently next to his attorney, eyes low, face unreadable. Brenda tapped the keyboard and played the clip. Patel's voice filled the room. Not the strained, defensive version from earlier, but a more confident, relaxed tone recorded from a Zoom training months ago. "Keep comms clean," the recording said. "If you've got anything that could even look like it crosses the line, send it through Signal. Never email. And if anyone asks later, deny knowledge unless you're backed into a corner." A hush fell over the room. Not shock, not outrage, just the sound of realization. A moment when people stop wondering if, and start realizing how. The recording continued. "We're not writing this stuff down. That's how people get pulled into hearings. You want cover? Use private channels. You want risk? Go formal. Your choice." When the clip ended, Jasmine didn't say anything right away. She let the silence do the work. Chairman DuPont leaned forward. "Mr. Patel," he asked, "is that your voice?" Patel looked up, resigned. "Yes," he said quietly. "Do you retract any of those statements?" "No," Jasmine spoke next. Her voice was steady. "Let the record show that these were not offhand remarks. They were instructions, given to staff by a federal official with clearance, explicit instructions to avoid accountability." Patel didn't respond. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something too low to hear. Patel nodded slightly, but it was clear to everyone in the room he had no more cards to play. Chairman DuPont gavelled once. "This hearing," he said, "will now move into extended review. The committee's findings will be forwarded to legal counsel and oversight. Coordination with the Department of Justice will begin immediately." The tone in the room shifted again. Not explosive, not chaotic, just serious. It wasn't a political moment anymore. It was a legal one. Outside, the news vans were firing up their live feeds again. On the Capitol steps, more people were arriving, some with signs, others just trying to understand what exactly they had just witnessed. And inside, Jasmine sat back in her chair, silent, listening to the murmurs and footsteps around her. Brenda leaned over and whispered, "We weren't even looking for that clip." "I know," Jasmine replied. "It came in anonymously." Brenda's brow furrowed. "So someone gave it to us?" "No," Jasmine said. "Someone wanted it found." And with that, they both understood. This wasn't over. Someone else had a stake in this story, and they had just made their first move. As the headlines focused on Patel's unraveling, something else was quietly taking shape behind the scenes. The committee didn't know it yet, but the document trail Jasmine Crockett had used to dismantle Patel's testimony didn't come from a leak in the usual sense. It began 2 weeks earlier, 4 blocks from the Capitol, in a dimly lit archive room where a junior staffer named Melinda Kash spent her days sorting old transcripts and forgotten files. Melinda wasn't high-ranking. She didn't have clearance to classified meetings, but she was observant and patient. One afternoon, she overheard two aides joking about a ghost drive, a USB device that supposedly contained buried communication records. They laughed it off. She didn't. Over the next few days, Melinda traced mentions of a mysterious contact listed only as W staff line. 4 obscure references, all tied to Kash Patel's email metadata. She pulled the thread, quietly verifying connections until she had enough to know this wasn't a rumor. It was real. She didn't tell anyone, not her supervisor, not even her roommate. Instead, she printed what she found, sealed it in an unmarked envelope, and hand-delivered it to Representative Crockett's district office in Dallas during a weekend visit. All she said was, "Give this to her." No one else. Jasmine didn't know who sent the packet at first, but the files were original, clean, untouched by the official servers. They passed every forensic check. Then came the audio, sent separately encrypted with no return path. Someone wanted this exposed. Someone on the inside. But they weren't ready to show their face. And as Patel's credibility collapsed on live television, that someone was still feeding the fire. By the next morning, Patel's clipped confession and the audio clip had been replayed across every major news outlet. It wasn't just political circles buzzing. Ordinary people were watching, sharing, and reacting. In Sacramento, an elderly woman wrote her first letter to Congress in 20 years, saying, "I don't know much about law, but I know when someone's lying. We deserve better." In Oklahoma City, a group of engineering students launched a petition demanding transparency laws for congressional testimony. They weren't political activists, they were just paying attention. Even inside Patel's own network, things were unraveling. One of his former aides gave an anonymous statement, confirming that secretive communication practices had long been the norm. Everyone, he said, knew how to talk without leaving footprints. But Jasmine Crockett didn't claim victory. She didn't hold a press conference or schedule interviews. When a reporter caught her outside her office that Friday, all she said was, "I'm glad the truth got the microphone." That one line spread faster than any headline. And behind the public reaction, a quieter process had already begun. A federal audit was underway. Names, emails, metadata. People who thought no one would ever check were now being quietly reviewed. And Melinda Kash? She returned to her desk like nothing had happened. No one around her knew what she had done. She preferred it that way. She hadn't done it for attention. She'd done it because someone had to. In the end, it wasn't the documents, the memo, or even the recording that left the deepest impression. It was the silence. The moment after the clip played, when Kash Patel admitted it was his voice, then had nothing left to say. That pause said more than any outburst could have. Clips of that silence spread across platforms. News anchors aired it without commentary. People watched, not for drama, but because they recognized something rare, truth cornered and unable to escape. The ripple effects didn't stop with Patel. Across agencies, internal audits quietly began. People who had long operated in the shadows were suddenly checking their email logs and second-guessing old conversations. Oversight wasn't just a word now, it was a process, finally turning back toward the people it was meant to serve. Jasmine didn't celebrate. She returned to her work. No interviews, no sound bites. Her one line, "I'm glad the truth got the microphone," had already done the job. It was written on signs, shared in forums, added to email signatures, not because it was flashy, but because it was simple. And far from the cameras, Melinda Kash went back to her desk, anonymous by choice, satisfied with what she'd done. She didn't need credit. She just wanted accountability to mean something again. This wasn't just about one hearing or one official. It was a reminder that systems built on silence can only hold if no one speaks. Someone did, and that changed everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We're not done watching, and we're definitely not done asking questions. Hit that bell so you don't miss what's next. Because when the system counts on silence, our voices matter more than ever. Bookmark back. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.